Britain is trying to argue that it doesn't overwhelm America with cheap imports. It's not like China. It's not taking advantage of the American market. It also will say that Britain's defence will suffer enormously if there are import ban or high tariffs, and that Britain's defence is vital for Western defence, which in turn is vital for American defence.
It is, of course, Donald Trump Day. Donald Trump will officially complete one of the most remarkable political comebacks in history later when he enters the White House for a second time. He'll be sworn in at midday Eastern time. That's about 5 p.m. our time. And because of freezing temperatures in Washington, D.C., the inauguration will be held indoors for the first time in 40 years. He's expected to sign a blitz of executive orders on his first day back in office, including targeting illegal immigration and granting a reprieve to TikTok. The president-elect addressed crowds at a rally in Washington last night.
For the next 4 years, I will fight for you every single day. We're going to be fighting for you. This is the greatest political movement in American history. And 75 days ago, we achieved the most epic political victory our country has ever seen. That's what they say.
He's also promised to end conflicts around the world.
I will end the war in Ukraine, I will stop the chaos in the Middle East, and I will prevent World War III from happening, and you have no idea how close we are.
Well, preventing World War III from happening does sound great. But, Michael, before we turn to that, what should we be worried about with Trump? What are you worried about with Trump?
Well, principally, the government is extremely worried about the threat to impose tariffs of either 10 or even 20% on all imports, without exception. Britain is trying to argue that it doesn't overwhelm America with cheap imports. It's not like China. It's not taking advantage of the American market. It also will say that Britain's defence will suffer enormously if there are import ban or high tariffs, and that Britain's defence is vital for Western defence, which in turn is vital for American defence, and that this would be really counterproductive to do this. And Britain is trying to pull as many emotional strings as possible, going back on the so-called special relationship, trying to harp on about Trump's personal links with Britain because of his Scottish mother, possibly even using the royal family as a way of ingratiating itself with the Trump administration. I mean, I have to say, I don't think Keir Starmer himself is particularly helpful or influential, in that Trump rather sees him as an ideological enemy. And he is much closer to people like Farage and even, surprisingly, Lynn Truss, who's out there for the inauguration. Liz Truss, out there for the inauguration. But let's just see. I mean, that is the main worry. The other worry, of course, is that Trump will pull out of NATO, or at least he will he will reduce enormously American contribution to the NATO budget, which would really hurt it, and that he will just give away Ukraine on a plate to the Russians.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, he's said that he's going to solve Ukraine. He had said he was going to solve Ukraine in his first day in office. I believe that's now been extended to 100 days, which is, I think, quite a lot more than one day. But will 100 days be enough?
It's actually a more realistic time, but yes, one day, I mean, it's ridiculous. But it's quite possible that something will start to move within 100 days. Putin was obviously waiting to see what Trump would do, because Trump is still seen in Moscow as somebody they can do business with up to a point. Of course, he changes his tune all the time, so they never quite know. But I think Putin is ready for some kind of bargain, which will be overwhelmingly in Russia's favour. The Russians do need an end to this war, but they need it on their terms.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, stick with us, Michael. But look, today is meant to be Blue Monday, which is supposed to be the most depressing day of the year. But don't worry, because the antidote to any lingering Monday morning gloom, and definitely not a marketing gimmick, is Paul Johnson, the Times columnist and director for the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Hello, Paul.
Morning.
Offer us some good cheer, as you always do. Never mind Blue Monday, Paul Johnson's here. Let's start, Paul, with the cheerful prospect, as we were just talking about, of Donald Trump imposing import tariffs of up to 20% on all UK goods being imported to the US. I have two questions, really, about this. The first is, from his perspective, can this possibly work? And the second is, how bad is it going to be for us?
Well, I'd be surprised if we end up in that position, 20% on all UK imports. There might be some level of tariffs on some stuff, but if he's going to do that to the UK, something bigger on China and the whole of the rest of the world, that's going to have a really quite significant effect on the world economy. I mean, the US is our second biggest trading partner after the European Union, so it would be genuinely quite bad news for those industries here which do make significant exports to the US. Some of them are very specific things. The Scottish whiskey industry is one that comes to mind, and then lots of specialist manufacturers who you've probably never heard of or come across. All of those things, it increases the cost to American consumers by 20%. Clearly, they're much less likely to start to continue consuming what we export.
I mean, I was reading over the weekend that the last time an American government imposed tariffs on China, China basically responded by just expanding the trade it did elsewhere and reducing the proportion of trade it did with the US. Is there any sort of cheerful prospect of the US, if it puts tariffs on the rest of the world just sort of carries on with less US trade and sort of does nicely out of it? Or is that a bit too much optimism even for Blue Monday?
Yeah, I don't think the rest of the world do nicely out of it. It's if the US imposes tariffs, but look, it's not going to bring the world economy down, but it will slightly slow growth. If you look at the modelling, actually, even the IMF and others have done, they find it hard when they run these things through economic models. They have a little effect, but they really don't have a huge effect on the world economy. I think the problems arise if you get second round effects in terms of further trade wars between other parts of the world, or indeed the political instability that it may create. And it is worth saying, there is a difference between China and Western Europe and the UK and many other countries in the extent to which China really does manage its economy and support its exporters. And it's not ridiculous of Donald Trump or other Western politicians to argue that there is something unfair about the trade with China. And that is different to trade with other countries. And I would hope that's reflected in policy.
Michael, you mentioned this before, but one sort of knock-on effect that tariffs could have is dramatically affecting defence spending in the UK. The paper today says that defence spending could be reduced by 1.82 billion, which would of course impact. It would also be impacted in terms of the stuff that we sell to the US defence industry and elsewhere. How worried should we be about that in terms of national defence, do you think?
Well, defence is a big industry in Britain. I mean, we do export arms all over the place. I mean, of course, many people are opposed to that on ethical grounds, but it does earn a lot of money for Britain, and Britain is very specialised in many of these areas. We have sold, advanced aircraft, vertical takeoff aircraft many years ago, and other things, particularly sort of parts and bits that are specialist made here. Rolls-Royce engines, of course, they come into defence aircraft as well, and Britain has expertise in this area, and I think the Americans would miss what we could or do sell if the imports came along. I mean, the import tariffs came along, and it certainly would hurt Britain. I mean, the defence market is very competitive. We are actually, of course, up against the Russians also. It's one of the few areas where the Russians are very competitive.
Well, that's an extra bit of fun.